initiatives. In response, Making Sense International offers a knowledge management platform to the global community of youth development professionals who are building the capacity of positive youth development stakeholders worldwide. This webinar forms part of our Apply It webinar series. The webinars are developed in conjunction with leading partners to provide the global youth development community with a convenient opportunity to learn from other organizations about concrete tools and knowledge they can apply to their work. So Save the Children colleagues, welcome and thank you very much for joining us today. To the 240 registered webinar participants joining us from 47 countries, thank you for joining us to take this deep dive into data-driven decision-making, specifically looking at how data can be used to improve programming. Webinar participants, we welcome your questions and contributions throughout this virtual learning event. Please write them in the chat box that's located at the lower left corner of your screen. We also welcome you tweeting and making Facebook posts on any key points you take away from this event. We invite you to use the hashtag YouthEO. Today we have 3 colleagues joining us from Save the Children. Patricia Langen is the program director at Save the Children, and she leads their Skills to Succeed initiative. Andrea Lozano is an M&E and research specialist at Save the Children. And we have Arif Firdas joining us from Save the Children in Indonesia, and he is their monitoring, evaluation, accountability, and learning specialist. Thank you all very much for taking the time to lead us through this webinar today. I'm now handing over to Patricia.
Can you hear me now?
Patricia, we hear you now. Please take it from the top.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So today we will talk about how Save the Children is
Andrea, we're having difficulty hearing Patricia. She's got a bad connection. Andrea, could you take over from Patricia?
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yes, we hear you well.
Okay, great. So hello, everyone. I just want to echo Fiona's word, thanking you that you joined us in this webinar. So we have a 6-point item agenda. We're first going to go over the rationale for SEL, our structured experiential learning approach. Then we'll present a case study showcasing this approach. We will show how SEL is being applied in Indonesia. We will talk about the conclusions and have a session on Q&A. So what are the outcomes of today, or the objectives of today's session? From our perspective, we want to share the SEL approach. We want to present the SEL in a real-world context using a case study and also the advance in Indonesia. We want to gather feedback from you, the participants, on how we can improve this approach and how we can improve the SEL approach, but also understand if you plan to use it in your own organization. So moving on to the rationale. Why are we doing this? Oh, sorry. I have a little pop-up here. Q&A. I think I'll just move it somewhere. Okay, sorry. So the rationale. Well, we think that monitoring data gets no respect. So the thing is, we do recognize that there is a typical divide between program managers and M&E professionals, what we call data users and data producers. So, in a typical world, the typical program manager thinks that monitoring data is only useful for accountability. Data only shows the problem, that goals are fixed, so I can't really change the work plan, right? And frequently enough, lessons and the opportunity to learn and extract lessons learned is an exercise that happens at the end of a project. But we realize that we really need to move ahead and change the paradigm. We, program managers, should need to think that there's more ways to use monitoring data, for instance, to find root causes and potential solutions to a given problem. Also, that data can help chart a new course toward a goal that is, of course, fixed, right, depending on what the project is. But the way to get there might need to change. And this is key because we work in dynamic environments where conditions do not remain the same. So we have to respond with the same level of flexibility to achieve our goals. And how to do this? Creating processes and habits for program and institutional learning through systematic approaches to experimentation. And this is what the SEL process is about, essentially. So what do we mean when we say structured experiential learning, or SEL? Basically, the deliberate attempt to collect and use monitoring data across alternative project designs to identify the best alternative that can later feed back directly to program design and implementation. Okay, and the ultimate goal of SEL is to generate and use evidence for internal and external learning. When we say internal, we mean continuous program improvement, but also institutional learning. And external learning is, contributing to the goals of the field and for evidence and learning of other practitioners out there. And it's important to recognize that SEL is an idea from behavioral economics. There's a lot of talk about this everywhere in many places. So you can learn more about this in the World Development Report, the latest one from the World Bank, which talks about adaptive design and iteration. Also, the USA Learning Lab is a good resource. Also, Ideas 42, that is all about behavioral economics, is a great resource. So we'd be happy to share our references as well if there's interest. So moving on to the SEL approach. I will walk you through the main steps, and then we will go into detail using a case study. Okay. So the SEL approach consists of 4 steps: define, diagnose, design, and test. I will present the general principles behind these 4 steps, and then we will move into more detail using a case study. Okay. So the first step, define, means identifying a problem and defining it in a way that it's specific, actionable, and of programmatic relevance. Okay, so this is the first step, and it's of critical importance. Step 2 is diagnose, and it involves identifying root causes of the problem. And the main activities that will happen under this step is to gather internal and external data, transform data into information using visual graphics, brainstorm root causes of the problem with various stakeholders. The third step, design, involves designing and choosing potential solutions to pilot. And the main activities under this step are brainstorming potential solutions for each root cause, select the 5 most relevant and less costly potential solutions to test, designing time-bound, area-bound tests for 2 to 3 potential solutions. And finally, step 4, there we go, which is test. And this involves comparing different approaches to select the best solution. And the steps, the activities under this step include selecting performance variables to gauge effectiveness, tracking performance variables for each test, and selecting the best solution based on pre-specified criteria. So now we'll move to the case study that will show each of the steps in action. So we start off with a typical workforce development program, right? That we have a labor market assessment. We start off with a labor market assessment that shows that there's a high demand for STEM jobs out there. And then as a result, we offer STEM courses in our vocational training component. But after a few months, we realize that only 1 out of 6 participants enrolled in STEM are actually girls. And this, of course, puts at risk our ability to achieve our program targets that are gender disaggregated. So we will now analyze the situation using the SEL approach. Okay. So step 1 involves defining a narrow, actionable problem, right? So we have 3 examples here. Which problem statement is narrow enough and actionable? So we have here example 1, the program is not popular with girls. So we think this statement is too broad because it does really not specify what popular means or at what point in the program. Example 2, we have gender disparity in primary education limits girls' ability to enroll in technical courses later in life. We mentioned that this is a workforce development program. We do not work with primary education systems. So this is really beyond the scope of our program. Example 3, too few girls enroll in STEM courses to meet the project targets. This indeed is narrow and actionable, and it directly reflects back to the relevance for our program. Let's see if I can do a little check here. Right. Great. So now that we have defined our problem, the next step is to identify its root causes. We can do this using 6 steps. So we can first review our routine monitoring data, right? So we have the internal program data that we have available. We should later gather secondary data, and this would be data collected that is created by third parties, right? And here, a good tip is to avoid national level data. In my experience, this sort of data actually is not very useful for the populations that typical workforce development programs in this field tend to focus on, which are very marginalized. So I would just suggest to avoid national level data. But if you don't have any other, well, it's the best option out there. Then the third step would involve data visualization. And this would be basically data producers creating graphs or tables or charts to aid a more intuitive understanding of what the data is saying, right? So this is all about bridging data users and producers. So this sort of steps are important. Then you move on to data assessment, basically comparing contrasting data to identify trends. And then you move on to identifying key stakeholders that you will invite to a brainstorming session. So I will walk through some of these 6 steps, 6 activities. So here we have routine monitoring data that's typically gathered for the program. So what does the data tell us? We see here that we have some background information like age and education disaggregated by gender. We also have enrollment rates in vocational training, but also in employability skills training. So we have a workforce development program that has 2 training components. And it's important to note here that we don't find any big differences across gender, right? In years of education, it's very similar. In age, very similar. Even enrollment in employability skills training is very similar. The big gap is still here, enrolled in vocational training. So this is important because in this case, this data validates our original problem statement. But it's important to note that there's always an opportunity for iteration to redefine the problem, right? So we might have had a case where the data actually did not validate our original problem statement. So it might be the case that maybe there's also a gender gap in enrollment of employability skills training, right? So we would have to go back and redefine our original problem statement. But in this case, in the interest of simplicity and time, we're keeping it very simple. All right. So then once you have a better understanding of the problem, it's time to identify key stakeholders for your brainstorming session. And here the idea is to have a very fast-paced brainstorming session where the team is tasked to come up with as many root causes of the problem that they can think of. And these are tips for the session that I'm sure most of you are familiar with, right? You want to have a diversity of backgrounds reflected in your participants, the key stakeholders that are present. You should always include youth or the perspective of your beneficiaries. And here it would be great to have former youth participants from a previous rendezvous program. It's always important to stick to time. So this fast-paced brainstorming sessions follow the HCD model where you have very short bouts of creative energy, but you have to use that in a very short period of time to get the juices flowing. And it's important to highlight here that no idea is bad. The more the better at this stage, right? So remember, the team is tasked to come up with as many potential root causes that they can think of. So, creativity here, it pays off. And then the entire group comes together and decides on the top 5 root causes, okay? So we have here in our case study that as a result of the brainstorming session, the team chose the top 5 root causes for the stated problem, okay? So some of them that I'm going to read out to you. Root cause 1, STEM courses are not interesting to girls because they think it's boring. Root cause 2, parents disapprove of girls working alongside boys. Root cause 5, girls have a negative opinion of STEM courses because they think that they will be perceived as less feminine among their friends. All right, so those are just some examples. And this is what the team came together and said, okay, those are the root causes that we think are more relevant. So once you have listed your root causes, it's time to move on to potential solutions, which brings us to step 3 of the SEL process, which is design. And this essentially is brainstorming potential solutions, right? So again, we have a few short tips of how to lead these sessions. So ideally you would create small groups, and each small group would be assigned a root cause and tasked to come up with as many potential solutions as they can in a short period of time. Again, this is a very fast-paced brainstorming solution. You should have a facilitator that is experienced leading this sort of sessions. No idea is bad, the more the better at this stage, right? And then once each small team has come up with as many potential solutions that they can think of, the entire team comes together and chooses the top 5 potential solutions. When I say entire team, I mean all the small groups come together in one place, right? And then again, there's always an opportunity for iteration to redefine the root cause. So this is very important because when you're doing the SEL process, you always should keep in mind that there's always an opportunity to iterate and redefine and go back to the previous step. So when the team comes together and matches the potential solution to the root cause, they will maybe need to redefine what the root cause was or how they interpret it. So they might be an important opportunity here to go back. Okay. So after the brainstorming session, the team chose the top 5 potential solutions. And of course, in the interest of time, I would just focus only on 2 here. So let's say here, potential solution to cause 1. As you recall, the first cause that was outlined was that STEM courses are not interesting to girls because they think it's boring. So potential solution that the team decided on was to work with employers and vocational schools to develop a STEM campaign focused on girls. Another potential solution for cause 5, that, as you might remember, this was the idea that girls have a negative opinion of STEM because they think they will be perceived as less feminine, since this is a male-dominated workplace in this location. And the solution that the team came up with was to identify women who work in STEM and convince them to become mentors of young girls in the program. All right, so you can see other examples here, and then Once the team chooses the top 5 potential solutions, right, we have here, it's time to select 2 or 3 of the solutions to actually test on the ground, right, which brings us to step 4. And we have here 3 potential solutions that the team agreed to test. And they decided to go with potential solution for cost 2. Identify employers who offer gender-separate workspaces and invite them to speak at trainings and job linkage events where youth and their parents are present. And as you may recall, this was in concern as a response to the root cause that parents disapproved of girls working alongside boys. And this would be more the case in STEM job spaces or workplaces. Potential solution for cost 4, work with employers to develop workplace improvement plans and share this information at trainings and job linkages events at school. As you may remember, this is in relation to the root cause of girls perceive STEM workspaces to be unsafe. And the potential solution for cost 5 was, as we talked before, to respond to the notion that girls think that STEM courses are not attractive because they will be perceived as less feminine. Identify women who work in STEM and convince them to become mentors of young girls in the program. So the team decided that they would test these 3 potential solutions, which we call respectively test A, test B, test C. Okay. So it's important at this point to take a minute and think about how did the team choose which potential solutions to test, right? So what is their criteria? And we think this decision should be based on the following criteria, which is stated here. Of course, you know, this is something that we've been thinking that is relevant to our case, but other reasons or other criteria might be more important in your organizations. So one important thing is to feasibility, right? So you want to test potential solutions that are feasible to implement in a short time frame. So you want to have you want to make sure that this test run alongside your regular operations, but that they don't absorb much of your resources and your time. So this is a key criteria. Related to the last point, that they're cost effective, not so costly to roll out. They won't affect your budget considerably, and feasible to implement alongside regular program operations. Okay. When doing step 4, the team must also decide on the performance indicators they will measure to decide which option is the best. Okay, so this brings us to this criteria. Some criteria to choose performance indicators are that they can actually move in a short period, right? So if we have a baseline and an end line, we expect to see a change, a movement in those indicators, you know, during the short time frame. That they're also feasible to collect and analyze, right? We don't want this to be an additional big burden on your M&E staff, and so feasibility is key. They're relevant to the potential solutions that you've decided on, right? So they will actually, you expect that those performance indicators will actually be impacted by the potential solution. And they're cross-cutting. And this is important because you want to make sure that you have, you will measure indicators, the same indicators across all tests. So that's why they have to be cross-cutting, okay? Across all your different tests, test A, test B, test C in this example. And how to compare solutions, this is important to specify ahead of time before you start rolling out the test. So this is essentially a team decision, and it will depend on your program's rationale or the motivations for the program. And some important questions that you might want to ask yourself is, are all performance indicators equally important to you? Okay, or is it the case that you should weigh, you should assign more weight to one indicator versus another? Okay, so I'm running like very short on time. So just going back to the case study, the team decided to collect 3 performance indicators. Value, safe, and appeal, girls' perception of how valuable STEM courses are, girls' perception of how safe STEM jobs are, girls' perception of how appealing they find STEM jobs to be. Okay, and The team came to this decision because they agreed that these indicators would be feasible to collect and analyze, right? So they follow the criteria stated above, and they also thought that all potential solutions could affect girls' perceptions on this topic. Okay. So here, I won't delve into the details here, but it's important to highlight that in this step, the team needs to agree on how they will gather these performance indicators. Questions like how will they gather the data, how often, for how long. All these questions should be answered at this stage. And so finally, just in the interest of time, I'll rush through this. Hello? Okay. So apologies. So we had here 3 graphs showing the performance of the different performance indicators for values, safety, and appeal. And I'm not sure why it's not showing. No, sorry. So the point of this exercise was to show that in this case study, the STEM mentorship intervention, which is colored gray, performed best in 2 out of 3 performance indicators. So that's why the team decided to go with this option and roll it out across all their schools. With no further ado now, I want to present to you Arya Firdaus from Save the Children Indonesia, who will present to you how the SEL approach is being incorporated into the work done in this country. So, Arya, go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Andrea. Hello, everyone. So I'll try to share. We just recently joined the SEL short workshop with Andrea, and then have discussion with the team to apply this approach. But before I talk more about our experience, I would like to share the background first in our organization in field office in Indonesia. So first, in fact, I realized that in our field office there are some projects with the similar interventions across the project area, such as like youth employability skill, have been applied in several projects. And then also the other project like literacy boost is part of the key interventions in education sectors, especially for at the Eastern Indonesia area. And then the other similar pattern that I realized that some intervention from different projects focus on specific approach, such as like focusing on training or improve specific like agriculture technique or something. And then the other side is at now we try to encourage people in field office to use the existing data not only for the reporting but also for learning in order to support management in decision-making process, even at the project level. So we expect that by this approach, we can also improve our learning cultures in our organizations. So at the other side, we also expect that with this approach, we can contribute to build capacity of the new staff, more specifically in doing such kind of advanced research methodology. So, and then when we receive the training, so we have kind of discussions among of the key staff or strategic staff. How do we plan to have SELs to be implemented in our organization. So the first step would be like developing criteria that are relevant with our context, and then identify like promising interventions. Like I said before, that we have like at specific in certain area, for instance, in one of the capital, we have 3 projects with really similar intervention. So then it's related to the next step where we identify resources and opportunity. So we identify at that time at West Java, we call it West Java, we have 3 projects with similar interventions where all the male staff are there. So it would benefit us since we can like communicate well and share learning experience during the process. And then the other step is to really introduce this approach with the strategic staff. I mean that the considerations to have like strategic staff at this stage is to consider first that whether the the we expect that the strategic staff will have a strong influence to encourage other program people to implement or to try this new approach in the field. So that's the step that we take for the SEL's implementations. And then we have like initial series of initial discussions with the strategic staff at that time. And then at the beginning, I found that the problem that they identify is quite very broad, and in our understanding, that it would be quite difficult and very complex for us to follow up the issue on the problem. And then we try to have a more specific problem that can be identified by the team. So in that case, we come to the solution, to the more specific narrow statement from at the first. They said that there is no significant interventions difference between intervention and control site at specific project compared with other projects. So we realized that would be a lot of external factors and would be quite complex to answer that question. So and then we come to more specific key intervention that they have, and then come to the conclusion, perhaps one of the main problems that might contribute to this issue is that there is no enough teacher that applying improved teaching method that introduced to them. So at this stage, we feel like quite happy or comfortable with the narrow statement. So and then the other step, according to the step that explained by Anya, and then we try to discuss on the root cause of the specific narrow statements, and then we come up with two root cause at the time, which are lack of ongoing support for teacher to implement improved teaching method, and then no clear benefit for teacher to adopt improved teaching method. So at this stage, what I really see during the process, even though that we just start the process, that the process to in doing step in SEL is encourage project people to really be critical on how they identify issue that relevant with the project and then doable, and then also during the discussions. So when they said perhaps there is no enough teacher that applying improved learning method, then we had naturally we ask them to, okay, so do we have any kind of data that will support this statement or what? So it will motivate the staff to dig more what kind of information or existing data that they have. And then it also, by doing the process in practical way, so we gain more better understanding on the SEL approach itself. So it all bring us to the kind of solution that the benefit of having this process is really valuable to yeah to encourage people in general to use existing data on information and reflect back what they about what they already did uh, in the past, for instance. So, Andrea, should I hand it over to you for the other slide, the rest slide?
Sure, I can go. Thank you, Arya.
Yeah.
Okay. So we want to just move on to conclusions. And so just to what we've been talking about. SEL is a four-step process, right? It involves defining a narrow problem statement, brainstorming root causes and potential solutions with key stakeholders, especially participants, right, or former participants, choosing potential solutions to test and indicators to compare performance and decide what is the best solution. Gather data, oh, I skipped ahead to the next one. It also involves gathering data and identifying the best solution. And once you have this best solution identified, rolling it out to all of the program. Okay. So on the limitations, some words of caution. You've probably been thinking about all the limitations of SEL while we have been talking. So just a few that we can think of now. So definitely this approach is a work in progress. As you know, we've just, as Arif was mentioning, we're just starting to take this approach in the country offices. So it's a work in progress. We also think it's most relevant for projects that already have quality routine monitoring systems, because otherwise the cost of data collection can be high. So to the extent possible and to keep the cost down, you want to rely on the routine monitoring that you already have to do SEL. It's also most relevant for projects with a longer time frame that can allow for learning and adaptation, right? So sadly, we live in a world where some projects are just too time sensitive, and there's really not a lot of room to maneuver and change course if needed and adapt, right? So we do think that this might be more relevant for projects with a longer time frame. It's also, because of the nature of the SEL process, it is suited for very narrow operational questions. That's important to keep in mind. And also a big, of course, concern is really what are the donors' openness to mid-course corrections, right? So it would, of course, depend on each case. So I actually want to end it here and open it up for questions. These are our names again, and if you have any questions or comments, please send them to me. But of course, we would like to open it up for Q&A now. And let's see, so I think I can look at what's been written already. All right. So I'm seeing question 2 from Danai. Why is root cause brainstorming done by project team and not in a participatory way that captures the opinions of the actual beneficiary population? So it's actually, we definitely want to have beneficiaries in those brainstorming sessions. So part of the key stakeholders that have to be identified are the youth themselves. In this case, it's a workforce development program. The only issue is that we, to the extent possible, we would like to maybe work with former program participants because, and not necessarily focus on the actual beneficiaries at that time. But again, it's a Hello? Hello?
Hello.
Hello. Oh, did I cut off?
We can hear you.
Okay. So I think there are many mics on. There's an echo. There, okay, that's better. So, let's see. So why is there pressure to do a fast brainstorming session as in the HCD model as opposed to taking the time to get it right? So yeah, that's actually a good question. And I think that in my experience, this sort of creating a pressure to come up with as many root causes or potential solutions as you can think of in a very short period of time is a way to really push people to think creatively. Sometimes when we have a lot of time, we start to really take our time to think about what is the ultimate best response to this question. But that's not the point of this exercise, right? We want to just have as many in the board as we can think of. So the idea is a creative process. So that's why we really emphasize fast-paced brainstorming session. So another question from Gabrielle, who is using SEL? Is it the program staff or the M&E staff? And I think this might be for you, Arif. Yeah.
Well, actually, in our context, in our country office, since this is new approach for us, the role of meal here is just like facilitating the process, how people identify the problem in order to have better identifying problems, etc., come from the project staff rather than M&E staff. The intention of this is to encourage people to use existing data and to really think or reflect back with what they did with their interventions. So that's the approach that I take at this stage. So all these discussions participate by the project staff, the strategic staff, and then we as MEAL facilitating the process. Does that help? Hello?
I think so, Arya. Yeah, thanks. Yeah, we heard you.
Okay.
So I want to actually go to a new question from Erica. How often are you doing data interpretation and at which level? Are you combining both output and outcome data, or is it quite selective in terms of which performance indicators? I think that's a great question, and I apologize that we didn't really go into those details during this webinar just because it's very detailed. But so in the case study that we're presenting now, we thought because of the nature of the potential solutions, we would look at data at the school level, but it actually will depend on what is the potential solution. So we do want to have collect data on the performance indicators that the team has selected ahead of time that they think will be a robust way to assess and compare the solutions against each other. So, and of course, because of you have routine monitoring systems that already collect output and outcome data or input or output data for your regular program, you would still track that, right, for your test sites as well. So you would still have, you would still expect to have that data across all the project sites. So that's key, but we would just assume that that would happen already for the program. Right, so let me just see, there's, oh, okay, so there's a main chat here. Okay, so Susan, I am clear how SEL operates alongside regular program implementation. Can you clarify? So the way SEL is supposed to, in an ideal world, how it's supposed to work is that once you've identified the potential solutions you will test, you have to roll out these potential solutions in a small portion of your, of your program, and it could be schools, it could be among a smaller group of your beneficiaries, and ideally this should be a random selection to make sure that those tests are comparable to each other, and you want to make sure that this SEL, this tests happen alongside your regular program, right? You're not going to stop the program, wait to see what is the best solution, and then reassume operations. It has to be alongside. And it's important to also collect those same performance indicators that you're collecting for test A, test B, test C in your regular program, which we call the business as usual group, right? Because there might be some trends that are happening naturally that you want to make sure you capture. So that's another thing. That might be too detailed now for this conversation, but I'd be happy to continue that over email or if you want to reach out. Okay, so some more questions. Who identifies the original problem? Is it identified upon reviewing existing monitoring data? That's a great question. So we actually, in this case study, it seemed like it was just part of the routine monitoring data, right? So you, the program manager or the meal staff program manager calls attention to a problem that might risk achieving program targets down the line, right? And essentially you will identify that problem with the data that you're already collecting, right? So existing monitoring data. So I think that see, how do you deal with donors who might not like what you're testing in step 4? That's a great question, and I actually don't have a good answer for that. So I guess it depends on who the donor is and whether you're able to convince them that, we don't live in a world where programs can just operate in a vacuum, but we have to continuously adapt to dynamic environments. And Fiona or Anna, I wonder whether, do you want to mention anything on next steps or ways to contact us? Yeah.
Sure, of course. Well, thank you everyone for attending the webinar so bright and early or very late at night, wherever you are. And thank you to our presenters, Andrea and Aryef and Patricia, for joining us and sharing this methodology and kind of starting the conversation on a very important topic. And we look forward to continuing the conversation in just a few weeks at the Global Youth Economic Opportunities Summit, which is taking place in Washington, D.C., October 6th through 8th. I know Patricia will be presenting there, so we look forward to kind of talking more about M&E for youth development. And in Making Sense, I just want to say that we take monitoring and evaluation very seriously, and we try to evaluate how well we do with our learning events like this one. So after the webinar, you will receive a link to an evaluation, which will take just about 2 minutes to complete, and we would very much appreciate you filling out the evaluation so that we can continue to create the most relevant and interesting learning events for you in the future. Finally, we will be disseminating the recording of this presentation as well as the PowerPoint, if that's okay with Save the Children. And we'll be posting that on our Learning Hub, which is www.youtheconomicopportunities.org. And we'll also be sending out an email with a link to that posting of all of the webinar resources from today to everyone who was registered. Also, just a little note from Save the Children. They would like to let you know that they're interested in getting your feedback on the SEL methodology. So we're going to include a few questions on that in a follow-up survey when we send out the resources. So please look forward to kind of sharing their feedback, your feedback with them. All right, thank you everyone for joining us. Have a wonderful rest of your day. We're going to wrap it up here.